Hi, welcome to Ecosystem Services Visualized. In this presentation, we will go over a very important concept that links the environment and human well-being. This concept is called ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the direct or indirect contributions from ecosystems that help support, sustain, and enrich human life. This includes things such as food and clean water, protections against floods and storms, aesthetic views, and opportunities to recreate. Ecosystem services can be generally divided in two groups, those with use values and those with non-use or passive use values. Use values are those services that are used either directly or indirectly by humans. They are usually divided in four categories: provisioning, cultural, regulating, and supportive. On the other hand, passive use or non-use value services are not associated with actual use. They are valued as services simply because people know they exist. This slide provides a list of the most common ecosystem services, organized by category. Supportive ecosystem services are the ecological functions or structures necessary for the delivery of the other ecosystem services. As given by the name, they support the provision of the other services. Regulating services maintain essential ecological processes and life support systems for human well-being. They keep things in the environment balanced. Provisioning services are benefits provided to people that can be extracted from nature. Cultural services enhance emotional, psychological, and cognitive well-being and are the reason why we visit, paint, or write about nature. Passive use services are not associated with actual use, but are valued because people know the ecosystem exists. They include bequest, existence, and option. In the following slides, we will describe each ecosystem service in detail, starting with the supportive services. Nutrient cycling is one of the supportive services. It is the storage, processing, and acquisition of nutrients within the biosphere. As an example, mangroves retain, remove, and cycle nutrients from land-based sources, which lead to clearer and cleaner water. Net primary production is a conversion of sunlight into biomass, which ultimately leads to plant growth. Pollination and seed dispersal is the movement of plant genes. Examples of this service include fertilization and seed dispersal by animals. In the U.S., according to the United States Department of Agriculture, 1/3 of all agricultural outputs depends on pollinators. Thus, protecting pollinators' habitat is critical for everyone. Habitat is the physical place where organisms reside. In regards to ecosystems, it is the role they play as a spawning, nursery, and refugium ground for resident and migratory species. Marshes, for example, provide habitat and refugium for young fish, shrimp, and shellfish, since their closely packed plant structure keeps large fish away. Hydrological cycle refers to the movement and storage of water through the biosphere. Examples of this service include evapotranspiration, groundwater retention, and stream runoff. We will now look more closely at the regulating services. Gas regulation is the regulation of the chemical composition of the atmosphere and oceans. This includes the absorption and release of oxygen and the sequestration and storage of carbon dioxide. Oceans, for example, are effective carbon traps that help alleviate the effects of increasing amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They represent the largest active carbon sink on Earth and are believed to take up to 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that is emitted by humans worldwide. climate regulation is the regulation of local to global climate processes, that is, the direct influence of land cover on temperature, precipitation, wind, and humidity. Disturbance regulation is the role that ecosystems play in reducing environmental fluctuations and disturbances. Protection from storm surge, hurricanes, and floods are good examples of this service. In this picture, we see a vegetated dune. If a hurricane were to hit this coast, the dune would play a crucial role in reducing the damaging power of water surge, waves, and strong winds. Biological regulation is the interaction of species that affects the control of pests and diseases and the reduction of crop damage. A common disruption to this service is the introduction of invasive species that disrupt the balance of native species interactions. In the Gulf of Mexico, for example, lionfish have been disrupting the balance of native species interactions. As non-native species, lionfish have no predators and are known to eat large amounts of native crustaceans and fish. Lionfish have been found to reduce average net juvenile fish recruitment by 79%. Thus, it is important to maintain the provision of this service by controlling the introduction of invasive species. Water regulation is the flow of water across the planet's surface, including the variation of the drought-flood cycle and purification of water. Soil retention information and erosion control is the ecosystem's role in the formation, regeneration, and retention of soil, and in the reduction of erosion. This service includes the prevention of soil loss by wind and runoff. In these pictures, we see mangroves and oyster reefs, both very effective in reducing shoreline erosion by dissipating wave energy and stabilizing sediments. Waste regulation is the role of nature in the removal and breakdown of non-nutrient compounds and materials. For example, in these pictures, we see marshes, which remove significant amount of pollutants from rain, rivers, terrestrial runoff, and groundwater. As illustrated in the diagram, as water travels through a marsh, it slows down due to the friction provided by marsh plants, allowing for sediments that are suspended in the water to be deposited on the marsh surface, facilitating pollutant uptake by the marsh and leading to cleaner water. Nutrient regulation is the role of nature in maintaining major nutrients within acceptable limits. Oysters, for example, filter large amounts of organic matter from the water column via the nitrification and the absorption of nutrients into their tissues and shells. This leads to a more balanced level of nutrients and improved water quality. On the other hand, as shown in the diagram on the left, an excessive amount of nutrients can stimulate an overgrowth of algae, which then sinks and decomposes in the water. This process consumes oxygen and diminishes the supply available to healthy marine life. This is commonly referred to as the dead zone, because most marine life either dies or leaves the area. Nutrient regulation is therefore crucial for healthy marine life. Next, we will focus on provisioning services, that is, the benefits provided to people that can be extracted from nature. Water supply, as the name entails, is the filtering, retention, and storage of water. Provisioning of fresh water for drinking and irrigation are two examples of water supply. Food is probably the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about ecosystem services. It is the role of nature in providing edible plants and animals for human consumption. Examples of this service include hunting and gathering of fish, game, fruits, and other edible animals and plants. Raw materials include materials for building and manufacturing, such as fuel and energy, soil and fertilizer, and timber and fuel wood. As an example, forests provide wood for manufacturing and construction purposes, and oysters, with their shells, provide materials for roads and chicken feed. Genetic resources are the self-maintaining diversity of organisms developed over time that allows ecosystems to continue to change and adapt to different environmental conditions. This includes genes that improve crop resistance to pathogens, pests, and other diseases. As a consequence, a decrease in genetic resources leads to a decrease in ecosystem resilience, which is the capacity of the ecosystem to adapt to stress and adversity. Medicinal resources include biological and chemical substances for use in drugs and pharmaceuticals. As seen in this picture, echinacea is a plant found in prairies that is commonly used to fight infections such as the common cold and flu. Ornamental resources include natural materials used for fashion, handicraft, decorations, worship, and souvenirs. Shells and pearls are a common example of ornamental resources. We will now talk about cultural services, those services that enhance emotional, psychological, and cognitive well-being. Recreation is the opportunity nature gives us to rest and recreate. Examples include surfing, fishing, sailing, and kayaking. Aesthetics is the sensory enjoyment of nature. A reflection of this service is the higher price people are willing to pay for a house with an ocean or beach view, just for the pleasure of looking at it every day. Science and education is the use of natural areas for scientific and education enhancement. As an example, marine biology classes often include a field trip to marshes or beaches, where students can learn about the different animals that live and that depend on such habitats. The spiritual and historic service describes the role of nature in providing spiritual and historic information. It can also describe the role of nature as a national symbol or as a source of significant religious value. As an example, people often use nature for inspiration and meditation purposes. We will now talk about the three most common passive use value services: the existence, bequest, and option services. Bequest is the value people place in knowing that upcoming generations will be able to use the ecosystem in the future. Option is the value people place in knowing they have the option to use the ecosystem. And existence is the value people place in knowing a specific ecosystem exists. As the name reveals, passive use value services are not valued because people use them, directly or indirectly, but because people know they exist and want them to continue to exist. Lastly, this slide includes an illustration of the total economic value of an ecosystem. On the left side, we see the use values, including direct and indirect use value services. On the right side, we see the passive use values, including option, existence, and bequest. The importance of taking into consideration the total economic value lies in the fact that undervalued natural resources will continue to be degraded by other social and economic activities that are mistakenly perceived to be more valuable to society. Over the past 50 years, humans have changed ecosystems more rapidly and extensively than in any comparable period of time in human history. This is largely because ecosystem services are taken for granted and excluded from the decision-making process. Valuing and acknowledging the benefits of all ecosystem services is necessary to start including them in the decision-making process so that more sustainable decisions can be achieved. Thank you for listening. To download this presentation, please visit GeckoServe.org, an ecosystem services valuation database. And to learn more about our group, please visit the Social Economics group at the Hart Research Institute webpage.